We're going to go over Math Workbook Pages 133 to 142. We're going to go over the most important problem. So the first problem is on page 133, number 1. They ask you to multiply the digit 3 by various powers of 10. So first, they asked you to multiply 3 times 10 times 10. Well, 3 times 10 times 10 is the same thing as 3 times 100. And 3 times 100 is 1,000. And you can even use the chart right here to do that. 3 times 10 times 10 is 300. The next one was 3 times 10 times 10 times 10. Since 10 to the third power is 1,000, 3 times 1,000 is 3,000. 3 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. Since 4 tens, or 10 to the fourth power, is 10,000, that was 3 times 10,000, which is the same thing as 30,000. Now they're asking us to divide 30,000 by powers of 10. So this time, instead of getting larger, our numbers are going to get smaller. So the first one was 30,000 divided by 100. So if we went to 30,000 and we went back 2 places, because 10 and 10 is 100, we got 300. Then we took 30,000 and we went backwards 4 times, because that's divided by 10,000. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 tens, or 10,000, and that was 3. The next one we're going to go over is on page 134, number 3. They had a chart for you to fill in. You had the standard form, the product of 10, which means you wrote it as a multiplication sentence. That's what product means, is multiply. And then in exponential form or exponent form, you wrote it with an exponent. You might not be able to see those tiny exponents. So that one was 10 to the third, because there was 3 tens, or you could have looked at it as 3 zeros in the standard form. Number 4 was another table. You were showing different ways to write 300, 3,000, and 30,000. So 300 is the same as 3 times 100, which is the same as 3 times 10 times 10, or 3 times 10 to the second. 3,000 is the same as 3 times 1,000, or 3 times 10 times 10 times 10, which is the same as 3 times 10 to the third. 30,000 is the same as 3 times 10,000, or 3 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, or 3 times 10 to the fourth. And the last one on that page says, how do you know how many zeros are in the product of 5 times 10 to the fourth? And it asks you what is the product. So there were 2 questions, and you should have had 2 answers. So 10 to the fourth means 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, which is 10,000. So there are 4 factors of 10, so you're going to put 4 zeros in the product. So it's 50,000. Because you're taking that 10,000 and multiplying it by 5. And 5 times 10,000 is 50,000. Now, that only is working here because this is a whole number. If this was decimal 5, you could not just add 4 zeros. It would not work. Okay, but since the decimal is at the end of this number, you can just add your 4 zeros. Page 136, number 3 is our next one. You just had to take the standard form and write it as a product of tens and write it in exponential form. Should have been very simple for you. The number of exponents matches the number, how many tens you're multiplying, and it matches how many zeros here. So we had 10 to the second, 10 to the third, 10 to the fourth, and 10 to the fifth. 2 tens, 3 tens, 5 tens, 4 tens, 5 tens, and we had 2 zeros, 3 zeros, 4 zeros, 5 zeros. The next one on that page is another chart where you're showing different ways to write 500, 5,000, and 50,000. 500 is the same as 5 times 100, or 5 times 10 times 10, which is 5 times 10 to the second. 5,000 is the same as 5 times 1,000, or 5 times 10 times 10 times 10, or 5 times 10 to the third. 50,000 is the same as 5 times 10,000, or 5 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, or 5 times 10 to the fourth. And the last one on that page, you are rewriting each division equation to show the power of 10 in exponent form. And you had an example that you could have used to guide you. So we're going to skip that example. 5,000 divided by 100 equals 50. So that's the same thing as 5,000 divided by 10 to the second, which also equals 50. So you're just taking this power of 10 here and you're writing it in short form. So 100 was 10 to the second and 1,000 is 10 to the third. The next problem that we're going to go over is on page 137, number 2. You had to use the decimal point pattern above to help you find each product or quotient. Product is when you're multiplying, like in these two and these two, and quotient is when you're dividing, like these two and these two. So 5/10 times 100, we wanted our decimal place to move 2 times, 1, 2, and we used that 0 for our placeholder. That's how we got 50. 5/10 times 10 to the second, well, 10 to the second is the same thing as 100, so our answer would still be 50. This time, instead of multiplying 5 times 100, we're dividing. So instead of moving our decimal point right 2 times, we're going to move it left 2 times, and we get 5/100. 10 to the second is the same thing as dividing by 100, so it's 5/100. 27/100 times 1,000, we're going to move our decimal 3 times to the right, and so that's 270. 27/100 times 10 to the third, which 10 to the third is also 1,000. It's the same problem again, just written a different way, 270. 2,700 divided by 1,000, we're going to move our decimal 3 times to the left. Remember, this here is not a decimal. That's a comma that's separating our period. Our decimal's at the end. So we move it 3 times to the left, and we get 2.7. 27,000 divided by 10 to the third is the same problem that we just did above. So it's 2.7, or 2 7/10. On page 139, number 1, you had to write the missing power of 10 in exponential form. So here we multiply 4/100 times something to get 4/10. Since our decimal point moved 1 time to the right, it's 10 to the first power. I'm multiplying 6/1000 times something to get 6/10. My decimal point moved 2 times to the right, so it's 10 to the second. However many times your decimal point moves, that's your exponent for your power of 10. So this decimal point moved 3 times, 10 to the third. This decimal point moved 3 times, 10 to the third. This one, 3 times, 10 to the third. This one, 2 times, 10 to the second. If you wrote 10, 100, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 100, your answers are correct, but you didn't write it in the form that it told you to. You wrote it in standard form, and they asked you to write it in exponential form. So you need to make sure that you have your 10 with your exponent, because that's the exponential form. Number 2 on that page, they give us the problem in long form and short form. 8 times 100 is the same thing as 8 times 10 to the second, which is 800. 8 times 1,000 is the same thing as 8 times 10 to the third, which is 8,000. 2 times 10 is the same thing as 2 times 10 to the first, which is 20. And 200 times 100 is the same thing as 200 times 10 to the second, which is 2. The last one on that page, 300 times 1,000 is 30. You move that decimal place 3 times to the right. You have to put a 0 as your placeholder. 1,800 times 100, you move the decimal 2 times to the right, and you didn't need a placeholder there. The last one that we're going to go over is on page 140, number 5. You had to match the expression to the correct quotient. Quotient means division, so all of these were division problems, which means all decimals needed to move to the left. This decimal needed to move left 1 time, so it was 52/100. This decimal needed to move left 2 times, so it was 5 2/10, which is right across. This decimal needed to move right 3 times, and you needed a 0 for a placeholder, so it's 52 thousandths. And this decimal, even though you don't see a decimal, is at the end and needed to move left one time, so it was 520. And the other choices, 52 and 5,200, were not used. Email me if you have any questions. Make sure that you log in for your math group time, and make sure that you complete your place value and powers of 10 practice test, because that will get you ready for the test coming up on your test day.